on guys, the Comics Kid 2099 here. Today I want to talk to you about Modern Masters Volume 3, Bruce Timm. This is about 180 or so pages. It's basically one really long interview with Bruce Timm, focusing on his career up until about 2004 or so. They start talking just a very little bit about Justice League Unlimited at the very end of this book, but you can tell that it hadn't even started airing whenever this book came out. So this covers quite a bit of his career. If you're a fan of everything that he's done, or at least most of what he's done, then you definitely need to check this book out. Now, I've never actually read any of the Modern Masters books, but after reading this, I'm interested in checking out a few of the others. I was looking at the back of this book, and there were several others that I was kind of interested in. Mike Allred, for example, I'm really interested in seeing what his career looked like from his perspective. There are some others that I wouldn't mind knowing more about them, but I'm not sure if I want to read 180 pages of John Byrne patting himself on the back. He's someone who I love looking at his art. I don't necessarily want to hear him talk about it. So this is kind of the opposite of a book that I talked about in the 365-day graphic novel review challenge, Batman Animated by Chip Kidd and Paul Dini. That was a book that focused on the artistic side of Batman the Animated Series and the New Batman Adventures, and a little bit on Batman Beyond. And what was weird about that book was it was mostly pictures, it was mostly art stuff, but it was from the perspective of Paul Dini, who is a writer and not really known for art stuff. And then you have this book, which is about an artist, but it is mostly words. Now, there are pictures. Here's a pretty good example of what you're going to get. There's a lot of words here, but then there are pictures. You'll get early designs of Bruce Timm's version of Superman before they got to what they finally settled on, and then early designs of Harley Quinn, or you'll get even characters outside of the DC Animated Universe, which is mostly what Bruce Timm is known for. But, for example, Freakazoid. That's a show that Bruce Timm very briefly was involved with. He didn't really work on it, but he was kind of involved with it in the very early stages. And what I enjoyed most about this book, even though I am a huge fan of the DC Animated Universe, what I enjoyed most here was seeing Bruce Timm talk about all the stuff he's worked on that doesn't have anything to do with the DCAU. I had no idea that he was involved with a 12-issue miniseries about the Fantastic Four. This would have been sometime after he was kind of a known commodity, so I want to say early 2000s, I think, and it was done with Eric Larson, and it sounded really interesting, but it's one of those things that Bruce Timm was almost ashamed of working on. He was kind of embarrassed of how that miniseries turned out. He said that he didn't really enjoy his time on that book. It didn't turn out the way him or Eric Larson intended for it to be, but him talking about it made me want to seek that book out, even though he even says in this book that it's not very good. But then there's some interesting stuff here where he says that he would love to do a Conan story someday, and Conan, as you can see, is on the cover of the book, and then he did eventually get to do a short story about Conan written by Kurt Busiek. So it's kind of neat getting to see, and this book isn't even that old. It came out in like 2004, so it's not that old, relatively speaking, but it's still interesting to see how much of this has changed just since this book came out. But Bruce Timm is one of those guys. He's very blunt. He gets to the point. He will call a spade a spade. He will talk about in this book, there was somebody that he worked with on some of the pre-DCAU shows, kind of more comedic shows that Bruce Timm worked on, who would just brutally tell you that your art sucked. And Bruce Timm even talked about one time this guy just spent an entire hour telling Bruce Timm that his art was terrible, and Bruce Timm just went home dejected. And I get that feeling from Bruce Timm himself. I remember in one of the commentaries of Superman the Animated Series how Bruce Timm and James Tucker were talking about when James Tucker first started, he wasn't very good. And Bruce Timm apparently wasn't afraid to tell him that. Now, I don't know if his process of letting James Tucker know that was any softer than when Bruce Timm was a novice learning at the feet of that guy. I don't remember his name, John something. But it is interesting that Bruce Timm talks about how very uncomfortable that was of an experience, but then he still really loved working with that guy, and he worked with him for a few years on a couple different shows, and it was the failure of one show that kind of got Bruce Timm to say, you know, I'm going to go in my own direction. I still think this guy's a genius, but I don't want to continue working with him in this way. But anyway, there's some really fascinating behind-the-scenes stuff here. If you are a fan of the DCAU, you obviously need to try and find this book. It's a little expensive now. I just lucked into finding it on eBay. If you can find it, I would recommend recommend that you read it because there's a lot of stuff here, a lot of interesting behind-the-scenes stuff that I didn't know about, and then there's some stuff you've probably heard before. If you listen to the Bruce Timm episode of Kevin Smith's Fat Man on Batman, you know that Bruce Timm worked at a Kmart when he was a teenager. That's something that they talk about a little bit right here, but then they get a lot more into it. Bruce Timm worked on He-Man. He wasn't like a main guy behind the original He-Man show, but he did work on it, and I believe Paul Dini did also, but they don't actually talk about how he met Paul Dini here. He kind of glosses over some of that. But there's a lot of really good stuff here, and I'm kind of spinning my wheels at this point. You really do need to check this book out, even if you aren't as big of a DCAU fan as I am. If you like the artistic style of Bruce Timm, I think you should check this out, because he goes into a lot of his stylistic influences here. Alex Toth, Jack Kirby, Harvey Kurtzman. There's some stuff here that I didn't even know that Bruce Timm was inspired by, like Mark Hempel, who did a little bit on Neil Gaiman's Sandman series. So some interesting stylistic influences that I didn't know about. So I think that this is definitely a book that you guys should check out. I enjoyed reading this quite a bit, and I am really interested in reading some of these other Modern Masters volumes now that I've read this. So anyway, I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys later with another video. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.